So as soon as this gets uploaded to you guys, we're going to start on paragraph 13, paragraph 12. The reply to home inspection is 2 paragraphs, 12 and 13. It is a little convoluted in that agents with 25 years experience can't get this right. So I ended up creating this for just that reason. Just realtors don't understand what it is that they need to do in reply to home inspection. So starting on paragraph 12, buyer's due diligence. And it says, the right and responsibility. Seller will provide access to insurers, representatives, and, as may be required by the agreement or by mortgage lender, to surveyors, municipal officers, appraisers, and inspectors. In addition, unless otherwise agreed, only parties and their real estate licensees may attend an inspection. That was added for a very particular reason. It became an issue that when a home inspection was done, the buyer made a business decision. This is the time to have grandma come in, Uncle Louie, and Uncle Louie watches the kids. So all the kids had to come. This is not a time for show and tell. This is a time for an inspection and a due diligence. So they actually had to add that, listen, only the people involved are allowed to show up for this. And that's why that last part is in there. 12A2, buyer may make 2 pre-settlement walkthrough inspections of the property for the limited purpose of determining that the condition of the property is as required by the agreement or any addenda. Buyer's rights to these inspections are not waived by any other provision of the agreement. Would anybody know why they give them 2 pre-settlement walkthroughs? About 5 years ago, we changed from the settlement sheet known as a HUD that still does exist to an ALTA. HUDs are still used on a cash transaction, but if the transaction is a mortgage transaction, the ALTA is to be finalized 3 days before closing. With that said, if there are conditions to this offer that are mandated by certain repairs and or improvements, the buyer has to get in there 3 days before to review and see if the work is done. That's why we have this 2-visit kind of a thing of a pre-settlement walkthrough. Most of the time, if you're having the seller make repairs on your reply to home inspection, you're putting 7 days minimum that the work has to be completed, so that 4 days before, 5 days before, you're going to do your walkthrough, do a punch list, checklist, and making sure that everything is completed as indicated. And then you can come back for the final walkthrough the morning of or the night before, or whatever the case may be. So that's the reasoning for that. Also, 12A3, seller will have heating and all utilities, including fuels, on for all inspections and appraisals. This is really important. If you're working with, and primarily that turns out to be an investor or an estate, a POA. Can somebody tell me what a POA is? Okay, a POA is power of attorney. Power of attorney, the life of the power of attorney ends with the death of the individual that they are the agent for. It's only as good as that person is alive. Once that person expires, so does the POA. And a lot of people don't realize that. If you're dealing with a POA situation on a listing, you must get proof of the POA, right? I know it may shock you, but people lie. And the title company is going to need to see the proof of the power of attorney. So you're going to be one step ahead of everybody, and you're going to ask for the POA before we get our listing signed to make sure we have the right person signing our listing, right? So heating and utilities may be off for various reasons. You cannot complete a home inspection. You cannot complete an appraisal without utilities being on. Therefore, without these utilities being on, now the appraiser and or inspector have to go back. That's an additional charge to the buyer to have them go back and finish their job. They can't tell you if the gas range is working. They can't tell you if the refrigerator's cold, electric's off. They can't tell you if the heating system's working, the water heater. We need utilities. So therefore, it's a very limited inspection. Remember where this is. Realtors, listing agents can smell green. They smell it right through the telephone. They know you don't know enough to know. And they're going to say, oh, listen, oh, honey, you got to get your buyer to put that in their name so it gets turned on. No. And you're going to refer. You're going to say to them, oh, sir, but please read on line 316. 316 in the agreement of sale clearly states that the seller will have heating and all utilities. You throw it right back in their court. Okay? Now, moving on. All inspectors, including home inspectors, are authorized by buyer to provide a copy of any inspection report to the broker for the buyer. You're going to be added on that chain, on that email chain. When the report comes back from the inspector, you're to be added on. So make sure you give your cards to the inspector so they can find you. Seller has a right, upon request, to receive a free copy of any inspection report from the party to whom it was prepared. Otherwise, unless otherwise stated, seller does not have a right to receive a copy of the lender's appraisal report. Again, you're green. And the other agent's going to say to you, hey, Vic, by the way, I need a copy of that appraisal, because they know you're green. They think you don't know enough to know you don't even know. And you go, sure, I'll send it over because you want to be congenial. If the appraisal ends up being greater than purchase price, the selling side's going to lose their minds. Never, ever does the seller get a copy of the appraisal report. Now, with that, there is one exception. And that is if the appraisal comes in under purchase price. If the property does not appraise for the purchase price, then they need to see it, and they will then make their decision on how they're going to move forward. You can appeal appraisals. It's not easy. Sometimes we end up in a pickle because the mortgage company is using an appraiser not from the area and doesn't really understand the idiosyncrasies about the city of Philadelphia, the neighborhoods and boundaries, and et cetera. So when we get an appraiser who comes in from Lancaster, Reading, it's always an issue. FHA, though, if the offer is FHA, that appraisal will remain with the property, right, wrong, or indifferent, for 6 months. It can become an issue. So on a conventional, you can appeal it because the appraisal is going to show the comps that the appraiser used to determine the value of the property, which may be like totally in right field. So never, ever does the seller get the appraisal report. No, no, no. All right. Then we move on. Buyer waives or elects at buyer's expense to have the following inspections, certifications, and investigations, referred to as inspection or inspections, performed by a professional contractor, home inspector, engineer, architect, and other properly licensed or otherwise qualified professional. All inspections shall be non-invasive unless otherwise agreed to in writing. If the same inspector is inspecting more than one system, the inspector must comply with the home inspection law and notices regarding property and environmental inspections. For elected inspections, buyer will, within the contingency period stated in paragraph 13, complete the inspection, obtain an inspection report or results referred to as report or reports, and accept the property, terminate this agreement, or submit a written corrective proposal to the seller according to the terms of paragraph 13. So within the time frame indicated, and we're going to talk about that in paragraph 13, generally, customarily, often is 10 days. So within 10 days of the execution date, who could tell me what the execution date, how that's determined in an agreement of sale? How is it determined what the execution date is on an agreement of sale? No? Okay. The execution date of the agreement of sale is when all parties have signed off, either by initial or signature, and or the last initialing date. That is the date of the execution. When we talk about time frames in the agreement of sale, the execution date is paramount to know when we start working with the clock. Execution date, let's pretend, was June the 5th. You don't count June the 5th. June the 5th was the last day of an initial change. Okay, last date that somebody took a pen or via the internet initialed off. We don't count the 5th. Please use your fingers. This is why God gave them to you. You start the next day, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. By the 15th day, if we're basing it off of a 10-day inspection period, we have to turn in our information, our wish list to the seller. So what has to happen in those 10 days? A, we got to get the inspector out there. B, we get the report back. C, we decide with the buyers if we're making a wish list. D is getting it over to the listing agent within the time frame indicated. Now, because realtors can't do math, many buyer agents are waiting to the end of the contingency period. And that's how all of this works. The home inspection is based off a 17-day cycle. 10 days to do the inspection, 5 days for the seller to reply, and then 2 more days for the buyer to come back with any changes.
You gotta go upstairs.
So, and everything's based on the end. So many buyer agents are turning in their wish list to the seller on day 10. It reduces the confusion because if we turn it in early, let's pretend we turned it in on the 8th day. We've already got our inspection. We already got our report. Excuse me. We've already in our minds made the wish list and we're like, well, we're just going to turn it in. So we turn it into the listing agent on the 8th day. Now the question is, when does the seller have to reply? The seller has 5 days from the end of the contingency period before it. So the end of the contingency before it was the 10th day on the buy side, right? But we turned it in 2 days early. So now the question is, if on the 5th was our execution, and we went 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. The 15th of June was the end of our contingency, but we turned it in on the 13th of June. When does the seller have to reply? And this is where people get confused.
The 18th, or sorry, the 20th? 5 days
Okay.
after the end of the initial period.
Of the contingency, which was day 15.
Right.
And then they would normally have 5 more days, would be the 20th.
Right.
But we turned it in on the 13th.
So doesn't it still say the same?
Absolutely, it does. Very good. Very good. So the seller then has still the 5 days following the end of the contingency period. Regardless when we turn it in, the seller has 5 days at the end of the contingency period. This is where realtors get all confused. I will tell you, it's not such a bad idea, especially if you kind of feel like the other side's a little stunad, that you send a little email identifying time periods. The end of the buyer's contingency period is this date, the 15th. The end of the seller's contingency period is the 20th. So we've all kind of agreed on our time frames. I've seen so many agents get caught with their pants down. It's really bad. We as buyer agents must be so diligent and following the timeline so we are not in a default situation, okay? So really, really important. Let's start with our first option as a buyer. Home property inspection and environmental hazards. Buyer may conduct an inspection of the property structural components, roof, exterior windows and exterior doors, exterior building material, fascia, gutter and downspouts, swimming pools, hot tubs and spas, appliances, electrical systems, interior, exterior plumbing, public sewer systems, heating and cooling systems, water penetration, electromagnetic fields, wetland or floodplain delineations, structural square footage. Now, structural square footage and the determination of that are really limited to 2 professionals, not the home inspector. If the structural square footage is questioned in comparison to the assessor who originally in the tax records identified the square footage, an engineer or an architect are the only 2 people whose opinion of square footage really counts. Engineer or architect. Mold and other environmental hazards such as fungi, indoor air quality, asbestos, underground storage tanks, and any other item buyer may select. If buyer elects to have the home inspection of the property as defined in the home inspection law, the home inspector must be performed by a full member in good standings with the National Home Inspection Association or a person supervised by a full member of a National Home Inspection Association, in accordance with the ethical standards and code of conduct or practice of that association, or by a properly licensed and registered engineer or architect. Now, here's a scenario. Your buyer is a single woman, young, she's buying her first house. She says to you, you call her up and say, congratulations, you got the house. And they're like, yay! So you say, okay, we got to do a home inspection. Yeah, you know, I've been wanting to talk to you about that, she says. And so you go, okay, well, you know, I really like Uncle Joe to do it. You know, since Daddy died, Uncle Joe's always been there for me. And Uncle Joe really knows everything. He built this beautiful home up in the Poconos. Oh my God, it's gorgeous. And I really want Uncle Joe to do it. How do we respond to that request?
Ask her if he's licensed or approved. If not, then in order to protect herself, she needs to use somebody who will be able to be backed up. And in order for her to have any legal standing, she needs somebody who's approved. So,
Correct. All correct what you said. But we're dealing with emotions here also. So you may respond with something like, I hear you. And I understand where you're coming from. There's a couple little caveats. According to the agreement of sale, the individual has to be licensed. Is Uncle Joe licensed in contracting? No. Or maybe she says, yeah, Uncle Joe is. You may come back with, if Uncle Joe was to miss something, clearly it would be an error. I mean, he would never do it on purpose, but it's really, and that becomes an issue, it's going to be very awkward on Thanksgiving. So how about we do this? How about we have Uncle Joe come to the inspection? Let's hire a professional who does it all the time. And let's have Uncle Joe come to A, get a visual on the house, be able to ask the important questions that he's thinking of, and it's to assure you feel that you want Uncle Joe's opinion. You've covered all your bases that way, right? All right, wood infestation. Buyer may obtain a written wood-destroying insect infestation inspection report from an inspector certified as a wood-destroying pesticide applicator and will deliver it and all supporting documents and drawings provided by the inspector to the seller. The report is made satisfactory to and in compliance with the applicable laws, mortgage lender requirements. That mortgage lender requirements is referring to FHA-VA. If in writing up your offer, you indicated you wanted to have a wood infestation done, then it is mandated by the mortgage institution that you do that. You can't opt out. When an inspection, this is a general FYI, when an inspection has been identified in the agreement of sale, yet the buyer chooses not to do it, it dissipates at the end of the contingency period. So the buyer's contingency period is 10 days. If the buyer chose not to, on a conventional mortgage, do the termite or wood boring insect inspection, it disappears. It wasn't done. FHA-VA, you don't have that option. You elected it, you have to do it. And or federally insured guaranteeing agency, FHA. The inspection is to be limited to all readily visible and accessible areas of all structures of the property, except for fencing. If the inspection reveals active infestation, buyer at buyer's expense may obtain a proposal from a wood-destroying pesticide applicator to treat the property. If the inspection reveals damages from active or previous infestation, buyer may obtain a written report from a professional contractor, home inspector, or structural engineer that is limited to the structural damage to the property caused by wood-destroying organisms and the proposal to repair the property. Okay, so we send that over. We got bugs. We got to fix them here. Deed restrictions and zoning. Buyer may investigate easements, deeds, and use restrictions, including any historical preservational restrictions or ordinances that may apply to the property, and review local zoning ordinances. Buyer may verify that the present use of the property, such as an in-law quarter, apartments, home, office, daycare, commercial, or recreational vehicle parking is permitted, and may elect to make this agreement contingent upon the accepted use. Now, if you're dealing with something other than a one-family residential, you better cross your T's and dot your I's. Just because a property looks like a duplex It's a house with 2 apartments, has 2 separate gas meters, 2 separate electrical boxes, 2 separate water heaters, 2 separate heating systems. It may not be zoned as a duplex. That's a big problem we run into. It looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it walks like a duck, but it's not a duck. This is huge. In the agreement of sale, there is a contingency for verification of zoning. You better get your ducks in order. Now, on the historical preservational part, it can be a misnomer that that only applies to properties that are 200 years old, and that is completely incorrect. A property that could be less than 50 years old could have a historical preservational restriction due to the fact it was built in an area such as Old City that has a lot of historical property. So when that property was built, it had to have the look that of something 200 years old. So in doing that, to get the permission to build this property, they had to meet requirements from the city that it had to look like an old house. Where do you find if a property has a historical preservational restriction on it?
Wouldn't that be in the city records?
In the public records in the city, when you look at that, it's on the bottom right-hand side, like in the middle of nowhere. It just says historical preservational restrictions. There's another place that's supposed to be indicated. Where else?
On the deed?
No.
No, okay.
Good guess, though. It's on the seller's property disclosure statement.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
On the seller's property disclosure statement, it asks the question, is this property in line with a historical preservational restriction? Now, we were in a lawsuit a couple years ago. We represented the buyer. The seller listed a property, did not identify it was or had a historical preservational restriction in the seller's disclosure. The best part is the seller was a licensed real estate agent. So the buyer goes to closing, nor did the buyer's agent pick this up, okay? So we go to closing. The buyer, Jesus, I hate these windows, has a contractor come out because he's changing all the windows. Then the neighbor comes down and says, Joe, what are you doing? He says, oh, Jesus, these windows are a hot mess. I'm getting new windows. Frank says, Joe, you can't get new windows. What do you mean I can't get new windows? This is a historical preserved block. Your house is in the whole block that's preserved. What are you talking about? Yeah. How about that? Joe couldn't get new windows. Nobody told him he had a historic house, couldn't get windows, couldn't do certain changes. And so now Joe's aggravated and he files a lawsuit. Okay? We've got to slow down a little bit, people, and read and pay attention what's going on around us. Okay. Water service. Buyer may obtain an inspection of the quality and quantity of the water system from a properly licensed or otherwise qualified water well testing company. If and as required by the inspection company, seller at seller's expense will locate and provide access to the on-site or individual water system. Seller will restore the property to its previous condition at seller's expense prior to settlement. Now, generally when you read that paragraph in your mind, you're like, oh yeah, they're talking about well water. Yeah, but let's go over that. Buyer has and is all within their right in the city of Philadelphia with public water to have the water coming out of the tap taken and analyzed by an EPA certified water testing company. Have I ever seen it done? Nope, except for one reason. When you as a buyer's agent are dealing with a property, you and your buyer, that's 90 plus years old, you have got to ask the inspector, Mr. Inspector, when you're there, you need to be at these inspections. Mr. Inspector, tell me the material of piping coming into the house. You've got a shot that that pipe coming in the house is lead. That happened to me 3 times in 1 year. Now, first time it happened, I was like, damn. So I leave the inspection. Yeah, there was typical bumps and bruises, but that was a concern. So I called the listing agent and I said, by the way, we finished the inspection. She goes, oh, how'd it go? And I said, you know, typical bumps and bruises, but I really needed an extension. Why? Because the pipe coming into the home is made of lead. And there was a moment of hesitation. And she said to me, yes, but you did not choose to have the water service inspect it. You waived it. My reply was this, you know, you're right, but it is a lead pipe coming in, which could easily and crucially be a health hazard. So for those reasons, we will have to supersede that and have a licensed EPA certified company come out and test the water. Well, apparently it sounded really good to her because she gave me the extension. She didn't have to. So for that reason, I now, if I'm putting an offer in on a property greater than 90 years old, 90 years or greater, I always have my buyer check off the water service. I've had listing agents get back to me and say, was this a mistake? You checked off the water service. No, it's not a mistake. The reason I did that is once we get to the inspection, if it just so happens to be lead coming in, I've kind of protected my buyer with the inspection. Oh, that's a great idea. See, not everybody could blurt out what I blurted out that day and won my case. So this just gives you another layer of protection if it should, God forbid, turn out to be a lead pipe coming in. Okay. Radon. Does anybody know what radon is?
It's an odorless gas that comes from the ground that's poisonous.
Okay, there you go. So it states here, radon is a natural radioactive gas that is the product that is, produced in the ground by the normal decay of uranium and radium. Studies indicate that extended exposures to high level of radon gas, can increase the risk of lung cancer. Radon can find its way into any airspace and can permeate a structure. If a house has a radon problem, it usually can be cured by increasing ventilation and or by preventing radon entry. Any person who tests, mitigates, or safeguards a building for radon in Pennsylvania must be certified by the Department of the Environmental Protection. Information about radon and about certified testing and mitigation firms is available through the Department of Environmental Protection Bureau, blah, 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 blah. Okay, now. Long-term exposure has indicated to cause lung cancer. So this is when, along with other times, but you've got to be listening to your buyers. Now they're jibber jabber. They're in the house, they jibber jabber, jibber jabber, jibber jabber. You go down in the basement and it's unfinished, but 9+ ceilings. It's got great ceiling height. You overhear the buyer say, I'm going to put Johnny down here. Look how big this is. I can petition off, put a bedroom, and put Johnny down there. Now, being the wife of a retired Philadelphia fire lieutenant and a fire marshal, the very first thing you're looking for is a second means of egress. You have to look, is there another way to escape this basement? If that staircase that's coming down through the kitchen is on fire, how is Johnny getting out of there? Or is Johnny just going to cook? As horrible as that is to say, right? But Joe Public doesn't think that way. You have to think for them. So this actually happened to me. We get downstairs, beautiful stone home in Ronhurst. I'm going to put Johnny down here. First thing I do is look around. Sure enough, at the very back of the basement is a door. I walk over, I open the door, it exits outside to concrete steps. Boop, 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 boop. You go up the 6 steps and now you're in the backyard. So I'm like, okay, second means of egress, so I can live with that. I say to Big Johnny, listen, if you're going to put little Johnny down here who's 23, that's cool. You got a second means of egress, but you have to do radon due to the fact little Johnny's coming in that back door Friday night around 1. He's sleeping till noon or 1 on Saturday. That is long-term exposure. We're not talking about running down, taking the load of wash from the machine to the dryer, folding those clothes, put them back, spending 20 minutes down there. We're talking 10, 12 hours of long-term exposure. You must do a radon. You have to say commanding statements, not like, what do you think? You must do a radon. He says to me, Vic, you're a pain in the ass. I said, yes, I know I am. We did the radon, and guess what popped hot? At that point, we throw that onto the seller and say, Mr. Seller, you popped hot, your property glows, and so now we need you to fix it. Okay? The means of egress is huge. Joe Public has absolutely no mindset about that. God forbid, God forbid, God forbid. It's how lives are lost. Years ago, it took me 6 months to find a house for a past client. Finally, we find a house. She says to me, we're downstairs. Oh, look at this little room. It's like a little office. I'm going to put my teenage daughter down here. I said, no, you're not. What do you mean I'm not? There's no way to get her out. There was a window, small window, kind of went sideways. I said, now, what we will do is I will get you a contractor who will put in the well. Now, in new construction in Philadelphia, you will see the well that's put in a basement with a sliding door cut in half vertically. It's not as tall. The slider opens. The individual gets out there and then climbs up the ladder to pop the top and get out. That's a mean of egress. That's how they can count these smaller square footage homes to have the third bedroom in the subterranean part, because there's a means of escaping. I said to her, we'll get a contractor out here and we'll have that done in a couple days so you could put your daughter down here. Excellent, right? Got it. Now I understand. Sure, we'll do that. Okay. It's a big problem. It's a big problem, and you must make sure they understand. If you're getting the, yeah, honey, I'll do that, don't you worry, you better, in writing via email, on a reply to home inspection, indicate the necessity of a second means of egress in that basement area if it's going to be used for a sleeping area. Now, you have a permanent record that you told them. God forbid something happened, right? Okay. You know, MetLife used to do a commercial, MetLife Insurance, with Snoopy. Mm-hmm. And Snoopy has his nose in the air and he's jamming and he's dancing. And the whole premise of that was the what ifs in life. Buying a home is scary. Buying a home is exciting. Buying a home is a necessity. They're not the professional. They can't see past the granite countertops. They're just so enamored by the whole thing that they don't see what's in front of them. They don't see the scary part. All they see is the pretty part. It's a brand new dishwasher. All right. Now, with that said, you've really got to pay attention to these people. You've got to guide them. All right, on-lot sewage. Buyer may obtain an inspection from an individual on-lot sewage disposal system, which may include a hydraulic load test of a qualified professional inspector, if and as required by the inspection company. Seller, at seller's expense, will locate, provide access to, empty the individual on-lot sewage disposal system, and provide all water needed unless otherwise agreed. Seller will restore the property to its previous condition at seller's expense prior to settlement. We're talking about here septic. I'm just going to click the central air up. It's a little hot in here. In the city of Philadelphia, I'm not going to say 100%, but like 99 point something, we are all public. This is generally what you have to take in consideration if you're in the burbs. Don't ever let a buyer try to convince you, well, I don't need to do that. Really? If there is a deficiency in a septic system, it can range from $5,000 to $35,000 to repair it. It's a nightmare. So stand up and say, no, you must have this done. This isn't even an option. Property and flood insurance. Buyer may determine the insurability of a property by making application for the property and casualty insurance for the property to a reasonable insurer. Broker for the buyer, if any, otherwise broker for the seller, may communicate with the insurer to assist in the insurance process. If the property is located in an especially designated flood zone, buyer may be required to carry flood insurance at buyer's expense, which may need to be ordered 14 days or more prior to settlement. Revised flood maps and changes in our federal law may subsequently increase future flood insurance premiums or require insurance for formerly exempted properties. Buyers should consult with one or more flood insurance agents regarding the need for flood insurance and possible premium increases. So, in the city of Philadelphia, we have flood zones. Like 21st, 24th, something like that in Carey. Downtown, because of the Schuylkill. So since we're sandwiched between two big rivers, we're sandwiched between the Delaware and the Schuylkill, has multiple concerns. One is flooding, and certain parcels are determined to be in a flood zone. Two, it's attracted by wood-destroying insects. Termites love moisture, and we're loaded. We're wet. We're wet people. Our ground is wet. Many, many properties have water penetration in their basement because we're wet. So this is part of your discussion with your buyers when they're like, nah is not it, okay? We're doing it. You have to understand, we have to do this, okay? Now, we're very fortunate. We actually have an agent in our office. She's brilliant, God bless her. Works for the city of Philadelphia in the water department. And when Sandy hit 5 or 6 years ago, whatever that was, she was part of the remapping for the entire city of Philadelphia. And so a lot of those changes she was part of. Now, if the property in Bright In Bright, you can hit one of the tabs across the top that talks about flood. And you click on that and it says, is this property in a floodplain? So Bright covers 4 states or whatever, right? Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland. Not sure part of Virginia. So a lot. That's what you want to refer to. If you're showing the property and you can see any water, I don't even care if it's this little tiny creaky thing that's so cute, but they built a little bridge that goes over and it's just so quaint. You better check. If you need flood insurance, I know factually that this happened in a transaction 3 weeks before closing. Underwriter went, wait a minute, this property's in a flood zone. To get the flood insurance was costly enough that the buyers didn't qualify then for the mortgage. That additional monthly cost threw them up and over their qualifying. If your buyer needs flood insurance, the most economical way of doing this is to call the listing agent and find out who does the seller have their flood insurance with. If you hook your wagon to that insurance company, you're going to get a much better rate than opening up a whole new policy by themselves. Okay? So that's one way to hopefully shrink some of that cost factor that comes along. All right, next, boundaries. Buyer may engage the service of a surveyor, title abstract, or other qualified professional to assess the legal description and certainty of location, boundary, and quadrants of land. Most sellers have not had the property surveyed, as it is not a requirement of property transfer in Pennsylvania. So you should know that. We can't do that. It's not part of what we do. It can be done, but it's not part of the process. Any fences, hedges, walls, or other natural or constructive barriers may or may not represent a true boundary line of the property. Any structural representation of size of property are approximates only and may be inaccurate. Lead-based paint. Before buyer is obligated to purchase a residential dwelling built prior to 1978, buyer has the option to conduct a risk assessment and or inspection of the property for the presence of lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards. Regardless of whether the inspection is elected or waived, the Residential Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act requires a seller of a property built prior to 1978 to provide the buyer with an EPA-approved lead hazard information pamphlet titled "Protect Your Family from Lead in the Home," along with separate form attached to the agreement, include disclosing seller's knowledge of lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards in regards to the property. We also have an other. So we have a separate line here. What might be something that a buyer may elect to have done to the property as a due diligence that's not in this form?
Mold.
Well, it did talk about mold earlier. In environmental hazards,
Right.
right at the very beginning on line 330. So what else? Not in here, but we want to check it out. How about stucco?
Oh, okay.
Stucco is a modern nightmare.
Right, with everything behind it.
Yep. So for the last 20 years, stucco has been more harm than ever good. Enormous amount of lawsuits at very high figures of money to remediate and correct water penetration behind stucco. So if the property has stucco, You definitely need to have that stucco evaluated by a stucco expert, not Uncle Joe and not the home inspector. You want a separate entity to do that. That's all this man does is stucco, right? Maybe when you were looking at the property, you noticed a funky odor, but you couldn't figure out why. Maybe you need that sewer line scoped. Now, I'm going to tell you, put this into practice. If you are ever selling a property that has been a rehab, you're the first one to buy this property after it's been rehabbed, from a grandmom house to this cool, hip and fun 3-story roof deck, fabulous $600,000 property. You must include a sewer scope. Contractors, God bless them, they'll kill us, but they throw everything down the sink. And what happens is when they're cleaning their equipment, not only does paint go down there, but spackle, and that's the problem. Spackle gets down there in the pipe, clogs, dries out, and now during the inspection, there wasn't a problem because it was minimal water used. But by day 3, you're getting a phone call because water's coming up through the basement because 7 people took showers. Do it. Make it a practice that you, anytime you're dealing with a rehabbed property, you have that sewer line scoped. Maybe it's an older property. Might not be a bad idea. You need to evaluate the small cost to have a scope put down a sewer line will save thousands of dollars down the road, right? So think about that.
Houses on my street, the trees have gone into the pipes. So they recommend it for everyone on this area. So,
I would do it. And then the water company offers a very reasonable policy. It's like $8 a month that you can take out with the water company to cover your sewer pipes.
Okay? I have a question.
Yep.
I had just gone on a home inspection with a buyer yesterday. And during the inspection, the inspector did mention that we should look into having the sewer scope. They found flies coming out of the little sewer in the basement. So once the report is back, because it was just yesterday, and this is my first time, I just got my license, so I'm completely new.
Oh my God. Are you in the pro coaching?
Yes, I just signed up for it on Monday, I think.
Oh, you're the best, Tiff.
I'm so new.
That's okay.
This is my first. So how might I go once I get this inspection report back? How might I reply to this inspection, considering the inspector said, hey, I think there might be a crack in the line going out of the house, and this cap has holes in it, and we see sewer flies. What might I do in a situation like that?
Okay. So on your reply to home inspection, you must turn over all reports or reports. Okay. So the seller has to have the inspection report.
Okay.
When you fill out your wish list, for a better choice of words, you are going to add an additional time period. So what you might do is this. You might get a hold of the listing agent right now.
Okay.
Say to him or her, listen, I'm supposed to get the report back today, but I'm going to tell you something. There is a lot of suspicion about this sewer line. There are flies coming out of it. And in the home inspection report, it's going to indicate possible crack. We need to have the sewer line scoped.
Okay.
So I'm going to reach out to a plumber right now. Give me a couple extra days, which you're going to have to do by addendum. Add 5 more days. So if you have 10, you want to change that to 15.
Okay. Now, question with that, with the 10 days to inspect, within 10 days of the execution.
Correct.
The buyer actually scheduled this inspection at the very end. So execution date was June 1st. We had the inspection yesterday.
You're out of date. first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seven, 8, 9, 10, 11. Today is the last day. Jesus, Mother Mary and Joseph.
Yeah.
You got to take control. You don't know this yet, right?
No.
Are you a parent?
Yes.
Wonderful. So this is when you have to learn to say no. When I teach a class, I actually make everybody in the classroom say no.
Yeah.
Agents never want to say no to anything. They just want to please everybody. Well, guess what? You're in charge, not them. So you got to get a hold of that home inspector today.
Yep.
Today. And you got to say to him, I have to have this ASAP. Today is my last day. He doesn't know. What the hell does he know? I got to have it today. Now you got to go back to the listing agent and say, the report's coming back today, and I already know I needed an extension for this sewer line.
Okay.
So get right on the horn to get 5 more days. And you're going to have to reach out to a plumber ASAP today to get that plumber out there.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Oh, God, don't get caught with your pants down. All right.
Okay.
So quick, after this, you got to call everybody and make things happen. From now on, you need to know enough to know. First off, buyers don't know a good home inspector from a bad home inspector. What the hell do they know? Right?
Yeah.
Okay. You need to establish, let's ask some people, names of good home inspectors. Because somebody's a home inspector doesn't mean they're any goddamn good. Okay, so who knows who this person was that came out, if they're any good or not. And you have not doing this, you followed along, but you didn't know if he was any good or not either, right? So between Michael and Will, you want to get 2 to 3 names of home inspectors that are proven to be good in the industry. They are the ones you want to refer out to your buyers because these people have a track record.
Yeah.
Okay. Saving $50 may cost you $5,000 because they're not any good. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to immediately get a hold of this home inspector. I have to have it today by pick a time, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. It's a must. Meanwhile, you're going to go with an extension, have your buyer sign in an extension, change of terms form, changing it from 10 days to maybe 5. Make it 7 days more because you're going to refer to the listing agent via the phone to give them a heads up. There's maybe a deficiency in the sewer line and I need to have it done.
Okay.
Now, let's pretend the seller says, I'm not doing it. I'm not signing it. I'm not giving you the extension.
Yeah.
You got to quick have a come to Jesus with your buyer. Okay. We went to the edge of the envelope and waited way too long. Now that we're here, we got to act immediately. If the seller chooses not to give you an extension, so we can investigate this sewer line, Ms. Buyer, what do you want to do? You know, sometime to get people's attention, you might have to send a termination. Send the termination, and then you'll get a phone call from the listing agent. What the hell? What's this about? Listen, I got to have more time. I got to have time to check and do my due diligence with this sewer line. And if you're not going to give me the extension, I'm getting my buyer out of this transaction.
Okay.
Okay? You have deposit monies down on it, don't you?
Yeah.
How much?
It's 1,000 so far.
No, don't do anything yet. When are you due for your second?
What's today? The 11th, and 4 more days.
Okay, you got to act because if you don't turn in your second deposit, then you're in default.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of wheels turning right now. You may want to reach out to Michael or Will.
Okay.
No, not may. You need to.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
All right.
All right.
Okay. Let's talk about notice regarding properties. These are other environmental inspections. They're just kind of giving you an FYI. Exterior building material, number 1. What is that? Exterior building material. How about stucco, right? they're saying you can do that. Talks about mold, wetland, asbestos, blah, blah, blah. Okay, paragraph 13. The contingency period is 10 days if not specified from the execution date for each inspection elected in paragraph 12C. So paragraph 12 just is what we're choosing, right? Within the stated contingency period and as a result of any inspection elected in paragraph 12C, except as stated in paragraph 13C. If the results of any inspection elected in 12C are satisfactory to the buyer's happy, a couple bumps and bruises, I don't care. Buyer will present all reports in their entirety to the seller, accept the property with the information stated in the reports, and agree to release in paragraph 28 of this agreement. Or, if the results of any inspection elected in paragraph 12C are unsatisfactory to the buyer will present all reports in their entirety to the seller and terminate this agreement with written notice to the seller, with all deposit monies returning to the buyer according to the terms of paragraph 26 of this agreement. Or, if the results of any inspection elected in paragraph 12C are unsatisfactory to the buyer will present all reports in their entirety to the seller with a written corrective proposal, listing corrections and or credits desired by the buyer. The proposal may, but is not required to, include the name of the properly licensed and qualified professional to perform the corrections requested in the proposal. Provisions for payment, including retesting and a projected date of completion of the corrections. Buyer agrees that seller will not be held liable for corrections that do not comply with the mortgage lender or government requirements if performed in a workmanlike manner. That is the laziest term I've ever heard. What the hell is a workmanlike manner and who determines what it is? It's horrible. According to the terms of the buyer's proposal, following the end of the contingency period, buyer and seller will have 5 days, if not specified, for negotiating period during the negotiating period. Now, for 5 days after day 10 that you have submitted your wish list, seller has 5 days to go back and forth and make a decision. Seller will acknowledge in writing seller's agreement to satisfy all the terms of the buyer's proposal. Sellers have 4 choices. First one is, oh my God, A, I didn't even know A, B, and C in the report were broken. Don't worry about a thing. I'm going to take care of it. I'm fabulous. You're like, oh, wonderful. B, seller can say, you want A, B, and C fixed. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll fix A and C, but I'm not fixing B. Or, number 3, seller can say, nah, I'm not fixing anything. Or, number 4, the seller can say, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to fix it, but I'm going to give you some money. Here's $1,000, you fix it. Okay? Keep in mind, if your agreement is based on seller's assist, and the seller wants to give you cash to make that problem go away, you need to confirm with the loan institution that you have not exceeded the maximum seller's assist. Any financial payment from a seller in regards to home inspection is considered seller's assist. So you have to make sure you're within the guidelines. Seller agrees to satisfy all the terms of the buyer's proposal, or buyer and seller will enter into another mutual acceptable agreement. Buyer accepts the property and agrees to release in paragraph 28 of this agreement, and the negotiating period ends. If no mutual acceptable written agreement is reached, or, and that would be within the 5-day period, or if seller fails to respond during the negotiating period, within blank days, 2 if not specified, following the end of the negotiating period. So that's day 16. Buyer will accept the property with the information stated in the report and agree to release in paragraph 28 of this agreement, or terminate this agreement with written notice to the seller, with all deposit monies returning to the buyer according to the terms of paragraph 26 of this agreement. Now, this next paragraph is paramount, and it says, if buyer and seller do not reach a mutual acceptable written agreement, and buyer does not terminate this agreement by written notice to the seller within the time frame allotted in paragraph 13B, 3B, buyer will accept the property and agree to release in paragraph 28 of this agreement. Ongoing negotiations do not automatically extend the negotiating period. If the seller goes underground and you don't hear from them for those 5 days, and your buyer doesn't make a decision to terminate, they just bought it with all the bumps and bruises. Bad juju. Everybody's got to pay really good attention to dates. All right, kids. There you go. Now you're fabulous. Of course, you already knew that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
See you. Bye. Thanks.
Good luck, Tiffany. Let me know how you make out, honey.
I'm trying. I will.
Get a hold of Michael.
I'm trying to reach out to him now.
Good girl. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.